What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Today let's get started. 16 evidences that show Eleanor of Aquitaine was untouchable. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a wife to two of the most important kings of the 12th century, but even aside from her marriages, she was a fascinating woman in her own right. The facts about Eleanor of Aquitaine speak for themselves. She was the rightful ruler of the ancient Duchy of Aquitaine in southern France, heiress to witty sovereign dukes who both supported great musicians and conducted love affairs with abandon, and forcibly married to a monk-like boy as a teenager. After a number of decades, she was able to divorce him, select her own husband, though the degree to which she exercised independence in this regard is up for debate, and establish herself as a powerful ruler for a number of decades on both sides of the English Channel. Even in her 70s, Eleanor of Aquitaine lived a life that included crusades, art, numerous children, and diplomatic travels throughout Europe. She was a ferocious advocate for her rights as a sovereign duchess and sought to maintain family harmony, with the exception of when she rebelled. Eleanor was a woman for the ages who was smart, likable, and savvy. She had two rival kings as her husbands twice. Eleanor walked down the aisle twice, both times to a powerful monarch or monarch-to-be. In order to ally her duchy to France, which was actually smaller than Aquitaine at the time, King Louis VI arranged the marriage of young Eleanor to his own heir, also named Louis. They tied the knot in July 1137, a month before King Louis passed away. The match was ill-fated from the start. The two had many disagreements, as Louis was reputedly very religious and Eleanor very sensual. After 2 daughters and 15 years of marriage, Eleanor and Louis divorced. Eleanor married Henry, Duke of Normandy, just 2 months after her marriage to Louis ended. 2 years later, Henry was crowned King of England and Lord of numerous French lands, and thus a rival to Eleanor's first husband. Legend says she confronted her husband's mistress in a maze. Sadly for Eleanor, Henry was far from faithful. There is contention that Henry kept Rosamund Clifford, one of his favorite mistresses, in a home in the middle of a maze at his Woodstock palace. He found his way each time by following a red string. But clever Eleanor soon learned of her husband's infidelity and wound her way to the center of the labyrinth, where she found fair Rosamund. According to one version of the story, she offered Rosamund 2 escape options: a bowl of poison or a heart-piercing dagger, which Rosamund chose. In reality, this tragic tale was nothing more than a fable. Rosamund actually passed in a convent, and Eleanor was most likely in prison, thanks to her husband, Henry. Her grandson took her prisoner. Eleanor favored her son Richard above her other children, though her youngest, John, was slated to be crowned king following Richard's rule. Another of Eleanor's sons, Geoffrey, was born between the two, but he died before he could take Richard's place on the throne. Geoffrey's son, Arthur of Brittany, was technically the rightful king, not his uncle John, but Eleanor supported John rather than her teenaged grandson. One reason for this may have been that Arthur at one point captured Eleanor, whereas John was the one to free her. To settle the conflict once and for all, one of John's lieutenants took Arthur and delivered him to the king. Historians still debate what happened to the young duke, but he was certainly imprisoned and most likely put to death, perhaps by John himself. Together with her first husband, she joined the Second Crusade. Louis VII and his German counterpart, Conrad, led the charge for yet another Christian crusade in 1147, though many French citizens, Eleanor included, were unenthusiastic about traveling such a great distance merely to reinforce the Crusader vassal states. In Louis's eyes, however, the crusade was an opportunity to atone for his sins, including burning a church full of people, so Eleanor eventually agreed to join him on the journey. From 1147 to 1149, the crusade was a terrible personal and military failure. Louis and his allies did not do much to help their Frankish cousins in the Middle East, and his relationship with Eleanor got worse a lot while they were away. The French also lost many men at the Battle of Cadmus. This massacre of Frenchmen was blamed on Eleanor because she allegedly became an unwitting pawn in a Turkish attack. She was ambushed once and nearly kidnapped twice. Prior to her marriages, Eleanor constantly faced the threat of abduction. As a rich heiress without a husband, greedy lords may have sought to kidnap her, marry her against her will, and claim her lands and wealth as their own. This threat was one reason why, shortly before his passing, her father arranged her marriage to the eventual Louis VII, and another reason why Eleanor was most likely concerned for her own safety once she divorced Louis. Despite her newfound freedom upon this separation, Eleanor knew she couldn't enjoy the luxuries of single life for long. She had to find a new husband for her own protection. She fled to Poitiers after her first marriage was annulled by a council, barely evading Theobald, Count of Blois, who would later marry one of her daughters, and Geoffrey, her future husband, Henry Plantagenet's younger brother. Fortunately, Eleanor took an alternate route home and arrived safely. She arranged a marriage to a new protector soon after. Hugh of Lusignan, one of John's foes, successfully ambushed Eleanor in 1200 and held her captive. However, Hugh attacked Eleanor in order to extort John's support in Hugh's claim to a random piece of land, and her imprisonment was not for the purpose of gaining her land. She was her own kind of duchess. As a teenager, Eleanor was one of the most sought-after heiresses in Europe because she ruled a fertile, valuable region of what would later become France. Eleanor didn't hold Aquitaine by virtue of marriage, as was often the case. Instead, she inherited the land in her own right. As a result, she alone was the territory's legitimate duchess, and any man who sought control would have to marry her. For this reason, securing the marriage between Louis VII and Eleanor was a prosperous coup for the late King Louis VI. Even in her old age, she traveled Europe as a diplomat. After she was released from prison, Eleanor remained politically active. She was Richard the Lionheart's unofficial regent in England while he was on the crusade. Eager to arrange royal alliances, she went abroad in 1199 when she was in her late 70s. Eleanor traveled to Castile, visiting her daughter, also named Eleanor, who was queen of that country, as well as her many grandchildren. Her task was to reunite her own family with the French royal family. Eleanor, who had been married to a French king, and Henry frequently opposed their rivals across the Channel. The prince in question was the grandson of Eleanor's ex-husband, by another wife, the eventual Louis VIII of France. Eleanor met her granddaughters and picked one of them, Blanca, to become a queen and marry Louis. This diplomatic maneuver was a true success. Blanche became a powerful consort and mothered many sons, including Saint King Louis IX. She advocated for the tradition of courtly love. In true family tradition, Eleanor promoted the literary genre of courtly love, which advocated a particular code of conduct for women and the knights who lived to serve and love them. Whether or not Eleanor ever established a formal academy in Aquitaine to teach chivalry to men and women is unknown, but she may have instructed her ladies-in-waiting and male attendants to follow its precepts. Marie of Champagne, one of Eleanor's daughters from her first marriage, fostered the tradition even more than her mother at her court in Champagne. She didn't get along with her first husband. Arranged marriages were successful on occasion, but not in the case of Eleanor and Louis. Eleanor was a worldly woman who loved literature, music, and especially courtly poetry. She was beautiful and very sensual. In contrast, Louis was more ascetic at heart, a deeply religious man. As he was a second child, he spent much of his childhood raised in a monastery, perhaps destined for a career in the church until his elder brother died. Louis was rather naive, especially in contrast to Eleanor's sophisticated nature. He loved his wife but didn't share her passions. Eleanor was even said to have exclaimed that she'd married a monk. She birthed 10 children but only 9 survived. As the life expectancy in 12th century Europe was fairly low, child mortality was quite high. Fortunately, Eleanor's children didn't succumb to the statistics. She gave birth to 10 children, 9 of whom survived to adulthood. Sadly, her first son with her second husband did not survive. This child was named William, most likely for Eleanor's paternal ancestors and for William the Conqueror, founder of Henry's own dynasty. Young William died at the age of 3, but Eleanor went on to birth 4 more sons by Henry, all of whom revolted against their father later in life. Henry, 1155 to 1183, was the nominal ruler of England, although he held very little power before his death from dysentery. Richard, better known as Richard the Lionheart, was born in 1157, while Eleanor bore her last child, the troublesome John, in 1166 or 1167 when she was about 44 years old.